Hello, everyone. I want to welcome David Ireland to give the next presentation on the role of innovation in design. And you can please type your questions onto the Springboard page, and he will be answering them as we go along. Go ahead, David.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. My name's David. I'm one of the partners at ThinkPlace, which is Think Action. That's the name that we use for our work in the Breakthrough Action Project. So it's good to spend some time with everyone. It's a shame that I can't see who I'm talking to, but please send through any questions that you've got at any time. We can make this as interactive as the system will allow. So I've put together a few slides that give you a bit of a sense as to what I think innovation is about, and a bit of an apologies up front, I suppose, because I don't really know the level of familiarity people have with innovation. So I've set it at a level, but if it's too advanced or if it's too basic, then make it known in the questions, and we can dive into areas that are interesting and relevant for people. So. And also, just in case I forget at the end, please feel free to reach out after this conversation if you've got any follow-up questions or concerns or ideas that you want to explore in a bit more detail. So let's get into it. So innovation primer. And I wanted to make the point that I think everyone on this call is probably an innovator anyway. Innovation is one of those words that's got, it means a number of things to different people, and so I have a pretty simple definition for what innovation is and what innovation isn't. And when I think about it, I try to differentiate it between invention and improvement. And so invention is basically the creation of a new idea, and an invention doesn't have to create any value. It's just simply creating something new. Innovation, on the other hand, is about taking something new and doing something that creates value for somebody. And that's the really important part of what innovation is. If it's not creating value for somebody, then you're just inventing. And the other word that people sometimes get it confused with is improvement, which is really just the process of doing the same thing, but making it more efficient or making it slightly more effective. And just a few examples, right? So when we think about some of the really amazing innovations that have come about in the last, decade or so, take something like Google Maps or Apple Maps as an example. There was some really amazing invention that sat behind that, and whether that was GPS or whether that was, the user interface, or a number of other things that fed into this technology. But it wasn't until that all of those different inventions were put together and put into a product that we could use that it was able to have the transformative effect that it's had on all of our lives today, and that it will continue to have. Another example is, solar cells on houses or renewable energy in general. Again, some really incredible scientific inventions underpin those, but it wasn't until people thought about how are users going to extract the most amount of value out of this? How do I wrap a business model around that that's going to make sense for people to help get that out into the market? And it wasn't until those things happen that it's become the really amazing and, again, transformative innovation that's changing the world at the moment. Same thing with healthcare. We all know lots of incredible scientific breakthroughs, and again, even in the telecommunication space. But just to re-emphasize the point, for me, if you're not focused on turning that great idea that you've come up with into some impact somewhere, then you're really it's just a bit academic. It's just trying to come up with something new for the sake of it. And I think that's like at its heart, that's where innovation and design overlap so strongly. And for a little while, I when I got new into the design world years ago, it felt really familiar to the world of innovation that I've been a part of for about 2 decades now. And it's because that the basic philosophy is the same in design. Human-centered design, the type of design that we do at Think Action, is about understanding what the user needs and designing something that's desirable for them, that's viable and that's feasible, technically feasible. And at its heart, that's what innovation is as well. It's about trying to understand what the user or the customer is what their problem is or what the gain they're looking for might be, and then trying to come up with a solution. And most of the time that's a product or a service that you can wrap a business model around to help get that out into the market, right? So, and the basic process that we go through in that innovation process is you have an idea, and that idea is triggered from something, and often it's an observation of something that's happened in the world. You come up with a series of hypotheses around how you're going to test the veracity of that idea, and there are some tools that we use to do that. You can see underneath the hypothesis box there, and I apologize that it's not in presentation mode either, but when we were trialing it beforehand, presentation mode wasn't showing up, so you're going to have to look at it in this mode. But the little tool sitting underneath the hypothesis box is called the value proposition canvas. And that's one of the core tools that people get taught in the lean startup method. And I use it in the design work that I do, in projects with governments and with not-for-profits and anyone else that's wanting to think about, let's try to understand what a user's experiencing and how do we build a product or a service or a policy that's going to satisfy those needs. And I won't go into the detail on the value proposition canvas, but it's a powerful tool, and it's one you might want to look up. And then under business, it's the business model canvas. And the business model canvas was initially designed, as it sounds like, as a way for businesses to articulate on a page what their strategy might be. But over the years, there's been a number of iterations of that business model canvas. So there are versions that are applicable to lots of different instances now. And so you can get you can get a social impact canvas, you can get a mission model canvas, lots and lots of other ones. And so it's not just about the value of this canvas is not just limited now to like a commercial setting, but it can be useful for, the types of work that you might be doing in a breakthrough action type program. And what it does is that it gives you a framework for starting to think about what's the value that I'm creating for the user, who is that user, and how am I going to create a relationship with them? What are the activities that I need to do? Who do I need to work with to deliver those activities, and what type of resources do I need to have access to deliver those activities? And then down the bottom is about, well, what are the costs involved, and then what's the impact or the revenue generated? And so it's a powerful tool for being able to articulate on a page what your strategy might look like. And there's a huge amount of literature available on the internet for you to go and have a look at, or drop me a note and I can push you in the right direction too. So just, why might we be interested in innovation, and innovation in the context of what you're doing? I think one of the reasons is that the challenges that we're trying to face at the moment, they have no boundaries. That they're spanning organizational boundaries, disciplinary, cultural, geographic. They're complex, they're interconnected. Excuse me, they're at a scale that makes them challenging to work with. And often they've got an urgency and a criticality that means that we need to work quickly on them before they reach certain tipping points. And one of the powers of innovation, like taking an innovator's mindset to it, is that it's got such a focus on, innovation has such a focus on not just trying to understand how we create value for the users at the center of that problem, but it's also got a real focus on scale. And there are some, relatively newish strategies called blitz scaling that people are using to rapidly get their interventions or their products or services, whatever it might be, out to customers or users as quickly as possible. And some of those strategies are a little counterintuitive around how you manage risk. But the basic premise is that distribution trumps product. And the rationale to that is that by distributing, by getting it out as quickly as you can, you're going to get a huge amount of feedback from the users as to, the efficacy or the quality or whatever it might be of that product or service or intervention, whatever it might be. And as long as you've built in the mechanisms in place so that you can be updating and modifying your product or service, you're able to do that. And so input that you get from the market in real time, as long as you're agile enough, is a really positive thing. And again, just all the sustainable development goals, clearly these are big, complex challenges that require some new ways of thinking. So I was kind of keen to give you a couple of things that I talk about as, how might you innovate? What are some things that you might want to think about to help you become better innovators, recognizing, like I said on the first slide, in that I think you're all probably innovators already. And so I'm going to give you six steps. And the first step is that if you want to be innovative, then you need to innovate, right? And it sounds a bit trite, but it's true. And so things that don't work, right? And so people rush off and they think they can shortcut the process by just buying the magic innovation software. They think they can get someone like me to give an inspirational talk on innovation or run a one-day workshop. They think by buying a smaller innovative company that it'll do it, by running an accelerator program or outsourcing development to somebody else. But those things are, it might work, but really the tried and tested and proven model of innovation is just getting out there and trying lots of new ideas, running it through a build, measure, learn cycle where you can see which ones are working, which ones don't, and gradually increasing the fidelity of those prototypes until you've got some confidence so that you can scale those things as quickly as you can. So the other, and tied in with all of that is, don't be afraid. We talk about it as learning, but it's really just about recasting failure as learning. And I think this is an issue. This issue changes depending on the cultures that you're working in. And so it's interesting being an Australian, we have a real strong culture of fear of failure. And for a long time, we've had people, that fear of failure has held people back from from being willing to try anything like entrepreneurship, because there's just, they don't want to be seen to fail. Thankfully, that's changing. There are some countries that do it really well. And so I would just encourage you and your teams and the people that you're working with that always look at failure as an opportunity to learn. And as long as you're looking at it as an opportunity to learn and take that information and improve what it is that you're trying to do, that should be viewed as a positive thing. The second step is that tools don't equal skills, and that innovation requires learning. And so a couple of things that make a good innovator, some of the skills are managing innovation as a process, building open innovation, building an innovation portfolio, business model innovation, and experimenting. These are really important tools, skills, I should say, and as opposed to tools, which are things like idea management platforms or idea generation methods and books, blogs, and speakers. These are important things, but it's about developing the skills. And I think we talk about design as less of a method and more of a philosophy, and it's the same thing with innovation. It's about having that mindset of looking for problems and being willing to quickly get out there and try some, solutions or prototypes as quickly as you can, being open to failure, iterating your prototypes, and just keep on moving forwards. The third point that I'd make is that you need to experiment a lot, and as much as you can. And we've all seen, I'm sure everyone's seen, the graphs that talk about, why we experiment, and that experimenting might cost slightly more up front than if you weren't to experiment and you were just to build what you thought was the perfect product straight away and in isolation of everyone else. But you dramatically decrease your risk of failure if you experiment up front, as long as it's hypothesis driven and you're looking for ways to validate or invalidate various features of whatever your intervention might be. Experimentation is a really critical process of innovation. I often see people they ask the wrong questions when they're talking about innovation. They're talking about, they often focus on the technical risk, and they're talking about, can this product be built? And we see that a lot in, the tech companies that we might work with, but we also see it in the policy people that we work with, and even, a lot of the practitioners that we're working with, in that they're focused on how might we build this new intervention, or, there's this new amazing technology that we might be able to use. I think we can probably modify it so we can use it. But it's often the wrong question to ask, or at least it's the wrong question to ask first. And the questions you should be asking are, should we be building this product? And that's a focus on market. That's looking at, does this meet the market's needs? Or, in the breakthrough action context, does this meet the user's needs? And the second question is, can we build a sustainable business around this set of products or services? And again, if you're phrasing that in the context of breakthrough action, it's, can we build, or can we design a path to impact, for these interventions? And so even though it may not be like a commercially focused business model, or a sustainable business around it, every intervention will involve some type of process of distribution, some type of process of manufacturing or marketing or advertising or something else and that's about getting whatever the intervention is, from your desk into the hands of the users. And you need to think that process through and make sure that that can happen beyond you're doing it, right? Otherwise it's not sustainable. So yeah, so just to reiterate, focus on the questions of, should we build this intervention and how do we deliver this intervention sustainably, before you start focusing on that question of technical risk. The other model that's really important in innovation is this. It's called the build, measure, learn loop, and it's about building. It's about, you have a you see something happen in the natural world. You have a hypothesis. You develop a minimum viable product, or the first version of your prototype, whatever it might be. You run your experiment. You measure the outcomes of it. You learn from that data, and then you iterate or you modify that product, and you just keep going through that cycle. As long as the test is, you can validate or invalidate it, and that's often one of the things I see people do wrong. When they run their prototype, when they're testing their prototype, it's often that test is poorly designed, and it's either they're not testing something that they can either validate or invalidate, or they've designed it so that it definitely validates. And so we often talk about the real thing that we're looking for in these situations is to invalidate hypotheses. Because when you start a business, or when you start, the process of designing an intervention to solve a problem, it's really big. The potential features, the potential functions, the potential uses of that intervention is really large, because you haven't started to narrow down. And every time you invalidate one of those hypotheses, you're focusing more and more on a very specific set of features and functions. And the more you can focus, the more you increase your chance of successfully delivering that, because it's easier to deliver something with a really well-defined set of features and functions than it is to have something that's got hundreds and hundreds of features and functions. I mentioned these two tools before, the value proposition canvas and the business model canvas. Just when you're thinking about experimenting, you're trying to find this product market fit, and the market fit and the product fit is that intersection between what you're observing the customer is needing in terms of what are they trying to achieve, what are the pains they're experiencing, what are the gains they want, and how does your product or service or intervention match those? How are you relieving those pains? How are you creating those gains? And what are the features of your product or service to do that? And that then becomes one of the core features, that becomes one of the central pillars of that business model canvas, or whatever canvas it is that you use. So like I said, ask questions if any of this is, if you're not understanding anything.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. It's up to you whether you want to stop and answer, or keep going with your presentation.
I'm happy. Why don't we stop in case.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Elliot Duffy, who just spoke, he was our first speaker, says the importance of innovation seems to come up more and more, sometimes not authentically. How are you seeing the idea / importance / application of innovation change as it gains popularity?
Yeah, thanks, Elliot. Yeah, it's a good question. I worry that innovation, like design, was going through a bit of a fad, because for a while there, everyone was talking about innovation. But I think the fact that innovation has got such a strong focus on the creation of value for people, that it's it's not a fad, and that people see the value in it, and it's, as a methodology, as a mindset, it's sticking around. And I think the real change that I've seen recently over the last couple of years, Elliot, is that it's gone from this kind of mystical thing of people just saying, I'm an innovator, I try lots of new things, to people actually understanding a process of, lean methodology or whatever, whatever the innovation approach that they're taking might be. And that could be like a design thinking diamond or something. There's lots of them. But people are actually putting some rigorous methodology behind it now. And I think every time people put some rigorous methodology behind their approach to something that they're calling is innovative, they're increasing their chances of it being successful, which then means, as a philosophy, as a movement, it's picking up more and more followers because it's being more successful, right? So I think, I guess to summarize, I think it's just going from something that 10, 15 years ago was just really vague to something that's a lot more definable now. And when people talk about, or they think, I want to try something that's a bit more innovative, they can get onto Google and they can pretty quickly get some methodologies that they can start to use, or they can go and look at there's a bunch of tools and resources online to learn about different approaches on how you might, tackle a challenge in an innovative type of way. So people are being a bit more deliberate and considered in their approach to it, as opposed to just saying, I'm innovative. I hope that answers the question, Elliot.
Yeah, thanks. Why don't you continue, and then there's one more. Maybe there'll be more questions.
Okay, all right. So the fourth point is get customers or users acting as fast as you can. And I mentioned before, that distribution trumps product, and I really strongly believe that it's about getting it out into the hands of people to give you that feedback. And obviously, in certain circumstances, you got to do that in a way that minimizes risks. You're obviously not going to push something out that might cause harm to people. So clearly you got to manage that. But the sooner you can get it out, the sooner you can start getting some real-time feedback. But the other point to note is that customers or users lie to you all the time, and the challenge, and that's not them being malicious or deliberately misleading, but sometimes they may not know the answer. Sometimes they might be too ashamed to tell you the answer. A variety of reasons. And so what you're trying to do is spot behavior, not intention. And so this is one of those strong crossovers to a design approach, where there's a lot of, that ethnographic focus or approach of going and talking to people, watching people, observing people, where you're able to start to uncover some of the true reasons why they are behaving in particular ways, as opposed to just listening to them about why they behave in a particular way. That starts to help you uncover, what might I need to do to solve this person's problem. And the other point is, and I see this all the time, is that you just keep asking people the same question. And eventually, if you just keep asking people the same question, they'll get annoyed and they'll just say yes, just to get you to, leave. And so I always, I kind of counsel people, and when you're going through those interview processes, or when you're running surveys or whatever else it might be, just you need to make sure that you're doing that in a way that is not just either leading people down a particular garden path that leads them to the answer that you want. You're not pestering them so much that they're just going to say yes because they're sick and tired of interacting with you. And the other point, and I don't have a slide on it, but I call it the mum effect, which is you also got to remember that some people will say yes to you because they don't want to hurt your feelings. Like, I could tell my mum, I'm going to, set up a business, to compete with Elon Musk's mission to get to Mars. And she'd say, oh, that's a fantastic idea, David. I love you, and I believe that you can do anything you set your mind to. And it's, it's great, and it's good to have your mum support you in anything that you do, but it's not necessarily some information that you should use to bet your house on, right? So just also be conscious that people might be misleading you just because they're a friend, or they just don't want to hurt your feelings. And so focus on looking at behavior. So what people actually do, we're always looking for evidence of past behavior. So when we're having those types of conversations with the people, I'm probing them to say, rather than saying, would you be interested in a solution that might have these features, which is a speculative question that it's easy for people to say yes to. I'd be saying, tell me how you've solved this problem in the past, or when was the last time you tried to solve that problem, and tell me how it didn't work. Or how else have you tried to solve that problem in the past? And so you're still getting to those same types of answers, but you've got some real data there that's a lot harder for people to fudge than when you're just asking people to say, you know, would you be interested in a solution that has these features? The fifth point is to collaborate as much as you can. I don't think I need to necessarily labor this point, because I'm pretty sure everyone on this call appreciates the value of diversity of thought. But it goes back, you know, just to quickly go over it, Alfred Marshall, 1890s, was talking about the benefits of agglomeration. You know, we've known it for a long time. There's been a bunch of really interesting studies over the last decade that have looked to why the world's most profitable, most productive mega regions are always correlated with the most populated, most densely populated places on Earth, and it's because of diversity, it's because of efficiencies, it's because of transference of knowledge. It's why people who live in cities of 500,000 or more, on average, earn about 15% more than people who live in cities of 500,000 or fewer, right? It's just about getting access to new knowledge and new opportunities. We even see it in Broadway musicals. Musicals where there's a really interesting study by a guy called Brian Uzi, who looked at every Broadway musical from 1890 to 1990, and there's a strong correlation to, you know, chance of success based on how like the rates of collaboration between the people within each musical. So we see it time and time again. And it always amazes me when people take this insular approach and think that they can do innovation on their own. And you can't. Often ideation might be a process where you can do it by yourself. You can come up with an interesting idea based on something that you saw on your walk home. But to take that idea and to turn it into a product or service or intervention that can truly have an impact on lots of people, 99.9999% of the time, that's a team endeavor. And the value of a team is working with lots of other people that can give you lots of different ideas. And then the last point is just about getting creative. And there are a few things that it's interesting. As adults, we've developed these shortcuts in our brain that make it harder for us to be creative than what it was when we were all kids. I get really cranky is not the right word, but I get frustrated or a bit sad, I suppose, might be closer words to how I actually feel when I run workshops and people say, "Oh, I'm just not that creative." And every person on the planet was born super creative. Like, you look back, the most creative people on the planet are our 5-year-olds. I got a 5-year-old son, and you know, the stuff that he comes up with just blows my mind. And at some point, and it's probably when we start pushing kids through schools and we're getting them to start rote learning things as opposed to being creative, the brain just starts to work in a different way. And you know, while plasticity of the brain can be such a good thing, it can also lead to some shortcuts that make creativity a bit harder. And so just a couple of tricks, some things to think about when you're going through that creative process. And the first is addressing functional fixedness. So I don't know if people have ever done the candle problem before, but the problem is, you know, I give you a box of matches, a tray holding a bunch of tacks and a candle, and the challenge is how do you fix the candle to the wall so that when I light it, the candle wax won't drip onto the floor or the table below, right? And when you give that problem to people, you get a whole bunch of really fascinating solutions that people put together, none of which work very well. And it's because of this thing called functional fixedness, where because we are designed to process as fast as possible, our brain looks at objects and assigns the most immediate and obvious functionality to them, right? And so the trick here is to see the box not just as something that can be a receptacle for the tacks, but something that you could balance the candle on. And what you actually do is you fix the box to the wall with the tacks, and then you put the candle on the box, right? And then I light it and the wax just falls into the box. And I see this happen all the time, when we're working with clients or we're working with users and we're saying, what's a problem and how might we solve it? They just don't see the potential utility or the potential, various functions of what they've got available to them, because they only see those things providing the functionality or the utility that they know them to be immediately useful for. So just push it and just be conscious of our predisposition to suffer from functional fixedness. It's just a process of questioning. Yeah, so that's the solution. The other thing that we don't do as adults very well is we don't blend concepts very well. And again, kids are masters at this. And if we had a bit more time, I would have shown you a little video where I give you a challenge, which is I give you a basic outline that kind of looks like a clock, and I say complete the drawing. And 99% of adults just turn it into a clock. But you give that same challenge to 7-year-olds, and they don't see a clock, or they'll see a lion's face, or they'll see a flower, or they'll see a bunch of other things. And it's because they're able to blend concepts a lot better than we are. Equally, this challenge is one that I've given to people before, and the vast majority of people fail this. I'm conscious that this is a public health conversation, so there's probably a much higher degree of success here. But the challenge anyway is you're a doctor and you've got a patient who's got this really malignant cancer that if you don't get rid of, it's going to kill them. Unfortunately, you can't operate on it, because if you cut into their body, it will ruin a bunch of arteries or something that will make they will certainly die from it. And equally, the radiation required, if you shoot the radiation at it, the cancer is so big, it'll also kill the patient at that concentration of radiation. So how do you cure the cancer? And the vast majority of people can't solve it. But if I give you this story first, which is you're a general and you've surrounded this town, and what you're trying to do is take over the castle in the middle of the town. And what you've realized is that the opposing general has laid landmines down the 4 roads leading into the castle through the town, and that if you send all of your army down one of those roads, the landmines will kill all of your army. But what you realize is that if you divide your army into 4 and send them equally down those 4 roads at the same time, your army is small enough to dodge the landmines, but your complete armed forces are able to arrive at that castle at the same time and take over the castle, right? So if I give you that story, all of a sudden I go from something that's got like a 5% chance of success, if I just told you the medical challenge, to something that's got about a 90% chance of you getting the solution, which is that you divide the radiation into multiple streams and have it all hit the cancer at the same time, so that in aggregate it's the same concentration, right? So just be conscious again of this notion of conceptual blending, and look for opportunities where you can bring experiences from other times and other places, bring disciplines together, bring different people together. Just blending concepts as much as you can is a powerful tool to innovation. The other is analogous thinking. A really great example, there was a hospital in the UK that was having a lot of trouble with the efficiency and the effectiveness of their ICU and emergency wards, and they were finding that beds were going missing. They should have been in the emergency, but because a person came in an emergency, then they would wheel them into ICU. The bed would end up staying in ICU, and emergency was running low on beds, or ventilators were going, things just were not working as well. And they thought, well, how do we get better at that transition? And they thought, well, who's the best at transitions that we know of? And some bright spark thought of the Ferrari Formula One team, and they thought, well, they're amazing at transitions. They can have a car come in, they can completely service that car in like 7 seconds and do it consistently and reliably time and time again in super high stakes environments. And so they got the Ferrari team to come in and advise them on, well, what's the process that you might set up in a hospital setting to make sure that you get good transition of patients from an emergency to an intensive care ward. And they saw massive improvements in those transition environments. And so think about, what's an analogous environment where they've shown that to be successful, and how might you learn from that and apply that to your context, is another really powerful tool of innovation. Just some other things. Edward de Bono's Lateral Thinking is a good tool, for just pushing you and helping you think in different ways. Here's the classic problem. Draw 4 straight lines through the 9 dots without retracing and without lifting your pen from paper. A lot of people struggle to do it unless you've seen it before. That's the answer. But then some bright sparks, I think, from Stanford worked out that you can actually do it in 3 if you really push the definition of what you're trying to achieve here. So again, good example of lateral thinking. Brainstorming, another really powerful tool for coming up with lots of ideas. But just a note of caution on brainstorming. People often approach brainstorming and think that it's really important to not challenge people in a brainstorming environment. There was a really fantastic study done in Berkeley years ago. They got something like 227 women together and broke them into 3 groups and gave them a challenge of addressing the public transport issue in Berkeley. And one group was given the traditional brainstorming directions of, don't challenge each other, just let as many ideas come out as possible. Another was said, I want you to challenge people critically. I want you to really attack everybody, make it personal. And then the next one was said, don't attack people, but attack ideas. Be critical on ideas, be constructive on ideas. And what they found was that the number of ideas and the quality of ideas of the traditional brainstorming group was about the same as the group where people were attacking people personally. Not physically, obviously, but like personally attacking people and saying that was a stupid idea. I can't believe you said that. And the group that had I'm going to be really constructive and critical of ideas, not only had many, many more ideas, but had much better ideas as well. And so when you're structuring your brainstorming sessions, make sure that you're challenging ideas, because what you're doing in that process is giving people an opportunity to improve on their idea. And it's challenging them to start moving away from some of those built-in, shortcuts that we've got, like functional fixedness, that might be limiting our ideas. It's forcing us to do some conceptual blending, forcing us to do things like analogous thinking. War games is another example of how you might approach some innovation. I won't go into that, but there's lots of stuff online about how you might do that. And that was it. They were my 6 steps to being innovative, with some ideas at the end about how you might approach trying to increase some of your creativity skills. But really, just to sum up, like I said at the top, innovation is about creation of value. And it's not just about the creation of ideas. It's got some really strong overlaps with human-centered design in the sense that it's got a really strong focus on trying to uncover what the cause of the problem is, what are the problems, or what are the opportunities that the users or customers are looking for. But it's also got a real strong focus, possibly in addition to what design does, is that innovation, because of its focus on value creation, has got a really strong focus on how do we scale this thing? How do we get it out to as many people as possible? How do we make sure that we've got the systems in place to learn from that scaling so that we can make this product as good as possible, as quickly as possible? And that's it. Happy to answer any questions you've got. Thanks.
Thanks, David. This was fantastic. I had a question, actually, which was how do you institute? I love the idea of learning, and how do you institute that in a large organization? If you want, you can answer me offline. We're going to start our next presentation at 15 minutes. So that's up to you if you want to briefly answer now, or do you want to answer offline?
No, I'm happy to answer now.
Okay.
I think it's one of those things, it's cultural, right? And so it's about making sure that leaders are doing it, and that in every instance, it's typical change management process. It's that in every instance that somebody is at a process where they might fail, that the system is reinforcing the fact that it is okay to fail, as long as you're looking for an opportunity for how you might do it better next time. And so some of that is process driven. So it might be you might you might set some stuff up where people are able to capture things that they've tried, how, you know, what have they learned from it, what are they going to do differently next time. So in a lot of the companies that I work with, we have daily stand-ups where we encourage people in those companies just to list up, what did you do yesterday, what worked, what didn't work, what are you going to do differently next time. But I think a lot of it is just about being cultural and just having conversations with people and making sure that people are being supportive of one another in how they're approaching that. But it's definitely one of those things that have to be led from the top. You can't expect people to fail, be okay with failing and learning if their KPIs are only about success. If you're going to be measured just on success and there's a bottom line punch and, you know, you're going to lose your job if this doesn't work out, then that doesn't that undermines that notion of learning. Yeah. Does that answer?
Yes, thank you. I think we're going to stop the broadcast. People will be probably asking you questions during the day as they watch the recording. So hopefully you'll be able to answer, or today or tomorrow, to answer the questions that come in. So thank you so much, David. This was
no worries.
Fantastic.
Just so people don't expect an answer right now, it's getting late at night for me, so I'll answer tomorrow when I wake up.
That's what we told people. Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.